Emma Larson was not the journalist she had dreamed of becoming. At 34, she wrote listicles about celebrity home decor and edited poorly written blog posts for influencers who couldn't string a sentence together. Her own investigative pieces, the ones she spent her weekends working on, were consistently rejected by editors who found them either too expensive to pursue or too dark for a readership that preferred distraction over discomfort. Her life had shrunk to the dimensions of her cramped studio apartment and the daily commute that bookended her quiet frustration. Every morning at exactly 7:03 a.m., she joined the river of bodies flowing into the central station, a cavernous transit hub where the echo of thousands of footsteps mingled with the murmur of private conversations and the distant rumble of approaching trains. It was on Platform 4, waiting for the 7:15 to take her to another day of digital mediocrity, that she first noticed him. He was a fixed point in her otherwise monotonous routine, and without understanding why, she found herself looking for him every single day. The commuters had given him a nickname, the Angel of Central Station. He was a young man, perhaps 28, with an easy smile and a bright orange volunteer vest that made him visible from anywhere on the platform. He didn't ask for money or preach to anyone. Instead, he moved through the crowds with a singular focus, his attention never on the hurried professionals checking their phones, but on the invisible population that lived in the station's shadows. Emma watched him kneel beside a man sleeping on a heating grate, offering a thermos of hot coffee and a thick blanket. She watched him sit on a bench next to a woman guarding a shopping cart full of plastic bags, just listening as she talked, his head tilted in genuine attention. He distributed sandwiches wrapped in foil, his movements gentle and unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world. He maintained a small blog, the address printed on simple business cards he handed out occasionally, where he chronicled the lives of the station's forgotten souls and appealed for donations of blankets and canned goods. He was, by all accounts, a living saint, and the city seemed to love him for it. Desperate for a story that wasn't about the best brunch spots in the city, Emma pitched the idea to her editor with uncharacteristic enthusiasm. A human interest piece about a young man dedicating his life to helping the homeless at Central Station. No cynicism, no political agenda. Just pure, unfiltered good. Her editor, surprised by the upbeat proposal from a journalist known for her darker inclinations, approved it immediately. It was exactly the kind of feel-good content that performed well online. For the first time in months, Emma felt a spark of her old professional passion. She approached Daniel on a rainy Tuesday morning. He was repacking his worn leather bag, his supply of coffee seemingly endless despite the weather. She introduced herself, explained her project, and waited for the skepticism she usually received. Instead, he listened with the same patient attention he gave the station's residents. His eyes were kind, intelligent, crinkling at the corners when he finally smiled. "People should see the good that's still out there," he said quietly. If his story helped even one person see the humanity in the unhoused, then it was worth telling. He agreed to let her shadow him for a week. The first few days were exactly what Emma had hoped for. She followed Daniel on his morning rounds, filling her notebook with observations and recording snippets of conversation with his permission. He knew every person by name. There was Jerome, a veteran with a raspy voice who recited poetry he had memorized decades ago. There was Mary, a middle-aged woman who pushed a stroller containing her entire life's possessions and a scruffy, silent dog that never left her side. There was old William, who sat in the same spot every day, politely refusing everything except conversation about baseball teams from his youth. Daniel spoke about his own past with an openness that was disarming. He was an orphan, he told her, shuttled between foster homes in 3 different states as a child. He knew what it felt like to be unseen, to be a burden, to have no one to turn to. Everyone deserves a place to belong, he said one morning, watching the crowd surge around them. He was just trying to offer a small piece of that. His words were perfect. His mission was pure. Emma's article was practically writing itself. It was on the fourth day that Emma first felt a tiny crack in the perfect image Daniel presented. They were sitting with Jerome near the stairs to the lower level, the old veteran more lucid and talkative than usual. He was telling a story about a friend from the streets, a man named Curtis who had disappeared a few months back. Jerome missed him. They had shared a bench for nearly 2 years. Daniel's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. He placed a hand on Jerome's shoulder and said, gently but firmly, that Curtis had found a place in a shelter upstate. He was doing well now. Jerome nodded, accepting the information, but Emma noticed something strange. Daniel's eyes, usually so warm, had gone flat for just a moment. Later, as they walked away, Emma asked casually about Curtis. Daniel explained that some people moved on, found help, started over. It was the goal, after all. He smiled again, the warmth returning, but the moment lingered in Emma's mind longer than it should have. That evening, unable to shake a vague sense of unease, Emma did something she hadn't planned. She searched for Daniel's blog, the one with the simple design he used to solicit donations. She scrolled through years of entries, reading about the people he had helped. There were photographs, carefully taken to preserve dignity, of faces she had come to know. And there were updates. William had been hospitalized with pneumonia but was recovering. Mary had finally accepted a spot in a women's shelter. Curtis had moved to a facility in Albany. It was all perfectly documented, a chronicle of quiet victories. But then Emma noticed something else. She scrolled back further, to entries from 2 and 3 years ago. Names she didn't recognize. Faces she had never seen. And she noticed that for some of these people, there were no updates. No follow-ups. Just a single entry introducing them, and then silence. She told herself it meant nothing. People slipped away. That was the nature of the streets. The next morning, Emma arrived at the station earlier than usual. She wanted to observe Daniel before he knew she was there. She positioned herself on the upper mezzanine, behind a column, with a clear view of platform 4. She watched him arrive at 6 a.m. sharp, pulling his cart loaded with supplies. She watched him prepare the coffee, his movements efficient and practiced. She watched him approach Jerome, who was already awake, and hand him a cup. It was all perfectly normal. But then she saw something else. A man she didn't recognize, middle-aged, disheveled, approached Daniel. He was agitated, gesturing wildly. Emma couldn't hear the words, but she could see the man's anger. Daniel remained calm, his posture open and non-threatening. He placed a hand on the man's arm. The man pulled away. Daniel spoke again, his face kind. The man hesitated, then nodded. Daniel reached into his bag and handed him a sandwich and a card. The man walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Emma told herself it was just another interaction. But she couldn't ignore the way Daniel's eyes followed the man until he was completely out of sight. Her article was published on a Tuesday morning. By noon, it had been shared over 50,000 times. By evening, local news stations were calling, wanting interviews. A producer from a national morning show reached out, asking if Daniel would agree to appear. Daniel, humble as ever through Emma, declined the television spot but accepted the flood of donations that poured into his blog. Strangers sent money, blankets, warm clothing. Emma's inbox filled with messages from people moved by the story, people who wanted to help the angel help others. Her editor was thrilled. This was the kind of attention that could revive a career. Emma should have been celebrating. Instead, she was at her laptop, digging deeper into Daniel's past. She told herself it was due diligence, the habit of a journalist. But the truth was simpler. She couldn't stop thinking about the flatness in his eyes when Jerome mentioned Curtis. What she found was unremarkable at first. Public records showed Daniel Cross had been in the foster system in 3 states, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and New York. There were court documents from his teenage years, minor infractions, nothing serious. But then she found the obituaries. She wasn't looking for them. She was searching for the names of foster parents, trying to build a complete picture of his childhood. One name led to another, and suddenly she was reading about a couple in Ohio, the Millers, who had died in a house fire 15 years ago. They had been foster parents. They had taken in a young boy named Daniel. The fire was ruled accidental. Then there was a couple in Pennsylvania, the Garrisons. The husband had died in a car accident, his vehicle running off a rural road late at night. He had been a foster parent. His wife had survived. And Daniel had lived with them. Emma stared at her screen, her coffee growing cold beside her. She found another. The Cohens, outside Philadelphia. The wife had fallen down a flight of stairs. Accidental. Daniel had been 15, living in their home at the time. Then the Clarks, in New York State. The husband had died of carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty heater. Also accidental. Daniel had been 17. Emma sat back in her chair, her heart beating too fast. She told herself it was nothing. Accidents happened. Foster children moved through multiple homes, that was the reality of the system. But the pattern was there, undeniable once she saw it. In each home where Daniel had lived, one of the foster parents had died. Always accidental. Never investigated beyond a routine inquiry. She thought of Curtis, the man who had disappeared from the station. She thought of the names on Daniel's blog with no follow-up. She thought of the flatness in his eyes. The next morning, Emma went to the station with a different purpose. She found Jerome and sat with him, buying him coffee from the kiosk. She asked him, casually, about the friends he had lost over the years. The ones who just vanished. Jerome's eyes grew distant. There were many, he said. That was the life. But one name made Emma's breath catch. A man named Paul, who had been around for a while a couple of years ago. Paul had been different, Jerome said. He had money once, a family. He just couldn't get back on his feet. Daniel had taken a special interest in Paul, spent a lot of time with him. Then one day, Paul was gone. Daniel said he had gone to a program in another state. But Paul had promised to write, Jerome said quietly. He never did. Emma asked if she could see where Paul used to sleep. Jerome pointed to a corner near the stairs to the lower level, hidden from the main flow of commuters. A perfect place for someone to disappear. Emma didn't go to the police. What would she say? That a beloved volunteer might be connected to accidents that happened years ago? That homeless people had vanished from a train station? She had no proof, only patterns and intuition. Instead, she went back to Daniel's blog and started cross-referencing. She made a list of every person featured who had no follow-up, who had supposedly moved to shelters or programs in other cities. She searched for their names in public records, in obituaries, in missing persons reports. It took her 3 days. She found 3 names that matched unidentified bodies found in rural areas within 100 miles of the city. All men. All middle-aged. All with no family to claim them. The official causes of death were undetermined in 2 cases, exposure in the 3rd. Emma printed the information and put it in a folder. She didn't know what to do with it. She only knew she couldn't ignore it. On a Sunday evening, a week after her article went viral, Emma heard a knock at her apartment door. She wasn't expecting anyone. Through the peephole, she saw Daniel Cross, standing in the dim hallway light, holding a foil-wrapped sandwich in one hand. He smiled when she opened the door, that same warm, open expression she had written about so admiringly. He said he was in the neighborhood, checking on someone who used to live nearby, and thought he'd bring her a sandwich to thank her for the beautiful article. Emma invited him in, her heart pounding. He sat on her small couch, looking around at her cramped space with genuine curiosity. "You've been busy," he said quietly. His eyes fell on the folder on her coffee table, the one with the printouts. He didn't ask what was inside. He already knew. He looked at her, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then he smiled again, and his voice was soft. "You know, Emma, the world is full of people who look away. You're not one of them. That's rare. That's special." He stood up, placed the sandwich carefully on her table, and walked to the door. "Take care of yourself," he said. "Some stories aren't meant to be finished." He laughed. Emma sat frozen, listening to his footsteps fade down the hallway. The sandwich sat on her table, still warm. She never saw him at the station again. The blog went dark. The donations stopped. The angel of Central Station simply vanished, leaving behind only the questions Emma would carry with her forever. And sometimes, late at night, she would wonder if she had exposed a monster, or if she had driven away the only real good she had ever known. She never found the answer. She wasn't sure she wanted to.